The Namibian sun, a relentless forge, had dipped below the horizon, but its heat still radiated from the sand, a memory of the brutal day. Inside her remote research station, Dr. Ilara Vance, lean and focused in her early 30s, traced the faint, flickering heat signatures of a struggling desert lion pride across her monitor. Concern was etched deep on her sun-kissed face. The dry season was unforgiving, claiming its toll on every living thing. And this pride, usually a symbol of resilience, was clearly faltering. To compound her isolation, a flash flood had severed the only access road days ago, leaving her partner, Lucas, stranded on the other side. She was alone, surrounded by miles of ancient desert and the dying echoes of the wilderness. A faint scratching, barely audible above the hum of the generator, pulled her attention from the screen. Then, a pitiful whimper, thin and desperate, pierced the encroaching desert twilight. Ilara's head snapped towards the sound, her heart quickening. It came from the window, an elevated pane of reinforced glass designed to keep the harsh environment out. She grabbed her heavy-duty flashlight, its beam cutting a stark path through the gloom. What it revealed froze her. Clinging to the narrow ledge just outside the window was an impossibly weak 4-month-old lion cub. Its ribs showed starkly beneath a dusty, matted coat, and his left front paw was mangled, a dark stain of fresh blood seeping onto the glass. Emaciated and barely clinging to life, its tiny frame shivered uncontrollably. An immediate, sharp conflict ignited within Ilara. Years of rigorous scientific training screamed non-interference. Her entire career was built on observing, not intervening, on letting nature take its course, however cruel. But the cub's desperate, primal cry for help bypassed her scientific brain entirely, striking deep at her innate compassion. This wasn't a data point. It was a dying creature. Her gaze swept the vast, darkening expanse beyond the window, searching for any sign of a protective mother. A lioness, fiercely territorial, would tear her apart for approaching her young. But there was nothing, only the vast, silent void of the desert night. The cub's continuous, reedy mewing, a sound far too small for such a formidable predator, twisted something inside her. Its eyes, once in amber, held a raw plea she couldn't ignore. More blood welled from the injured paw, staining the glass. Ilara pressed her palm against the cool surface, a phantom pain echoing the cub's agony. "I can't just leave you out there," she murmured, the words escaping before she could filter them. Her resolve hardened, a fierce determination eclipsing years of strict protocol. Ethics, duty, regulations, they all faded against the undeniable imperative to act. With slow, deliberate movements, each muscle tensed, she reached for the heavy-duty latches on the window. The metallic click echoed in the silence. As she unlatched it, a rush of harsh, superheated desert air, thick with dust and the scent of dry earth, flooded the sterile room. She gently, cautiously reached out, scooping the impossibly light cub into a thick blanket she'd grabbed. Its amber eyes, bright with an unsettling intensity, fixed on her, a confusing blend of fear and desperate trust. Inside on her clean examination table, the cub remained unnervingly still. It was docile, compliant, a stark contrast to the wild, struggling resistance she would have expected from a rescued big cat. Ilara's brow furrowed. She cleaned the deep laceration on its paw, the skin torn and inflamed, applying antiseptic and bandaging it with practiced ease. "You should be fighting me," she whispered, her voice barely audible. She offered a bowl of rehydration solution, and the cub, as if starving for it, lapped eagerly, its small, rough tongue working quickly. As it drank, a disturbing thought began to take root. Its unnatural calmness, the way it had allowed itself to be handled. "You've been around humans before, haven't you?" Ilara mused aloud, her voice tight. This wasn't just an abandoned cub, it was something else, something far more troubling. And as the cub finally curled into a small, exhausted heap on the blanket, drifting into a fitful sleep, Ilara felt a profound unease settle in her bones. The desert had knocked, but it hadn't just brought a dying animal to her door. It had brought a mystery, one that promised to be far more dangerous than the wilderness itself. Words. 8:17. The pre-dawn chill seeped into the station, a stark contrast to the previous day's furnace. Alara woke abruptly, not to her alarm, but to the cub's distressed whimpers. Its small body, wrapped in the blanket, trembled violently, and its breath came in shallow, ragged gasps. When she touched its head, the heat radiating from its fur was alarming. "Infections setting in," she muttered, the clinical assessment doing little to quell the rising tide of fear in her gut. Then a sound cut through the silence, something far more primal than a whimper. The cub let out an urgent contact call, a soft, almost plaintive mew that carried an unmistakable yearning. It was a sound meant for a mother, for family, a call to reunite in the vast, unforgiving desert. But there was no mother, no pride, only Alara and the empty, waiting darkness outside. A pang of dread, cold and sharp, pierced her. This cub was truly alone and desperately ill. Without hesitation, Alara moved. She grabbed her medical kit, her mind racing. Scientific protocol be damned again. This was a life. With a trembling hand, she measured out a minuscule, diluted dose of human antibiotics, a desperate gamble against the odds. Administering it was risky, an unknown variable in an already precarious situation, but it was the only chance the cub had. As the first sliver of dawn painted the horizon in hues of rose and violet, Alara retrieved her camera. Documenting the cub's condition wasn't just for research, it was for accountability, for protection, for proof. She snapped a series of close-ups, focusing on its emaciation, the bandaged paw, its feverish eyes. Through the viewfinder, as she adjusted the focus for a shot behind its left ear, she spotted it, a small, unnaturally precise mark. Her breath hitched. She zoomed in, the tiny detail growing stark and clear on the display. It was a tattoo, a series of digits, 6-1 A cold dread, slow and creeping, began to uncoil in her stomach. "You're tagged," she whispered, her voice barely audible. This was not the ear notch of a conservation project, not a passive tracker. This was a brand, an ownership mark. Immediately, Alara reached for her satellite phone, her fingers fumbling slightly. She needed someone, anyone, who could make sense of this. Her former mentor, Dr. Nandi Kumalo, was the first and only person who came to mind, a formidable conservationist known for her sharp mind and even sharper tongue. Nandi's gruff voice answered, raspy with sleep. Alara, speaking quickly, explained the cub, the severe infection, the shocking discovery of the tattoo. A chilling silence stretched across the line, broken only by the static of the satellite connection. "Alara, listen carefully," Nandi finally said, her voice dropping to a low, grave tone that sent shivers down Alara's spine. "That cub is evidence. The tattoo matches a breeding operation we've been tracking for the past year." Nandi's words tumbled out, painting a grim picture of an illegal trade, exotic pets, hunting facilities, unspeakably dangerous people. Alara felt the blood drain from her face. "How did it end up at my window?" she demanded, her voice tight with a fear she hadn't known until this very moment. The sheer unlikelihood of it, miles from anywhere, felt less like coincidence and more like a deliberate act. Nandi didn't have an answer, only urgent instructions. "Document everything. Stay alert. These people, they're dangerous. Keep this quiet, Alara. Don't breathe a word to anyone." She promised a conservation team was already en route, but the flash flood meant they wouldn't arrive until tomorrow at the earliest, tomorrow. An eternity away. Alara hung up, stunned. The implications were enormous, vast and terrifying. This wasn't just about saving a cub anymore. It was about exposing a dangerous criminal enterprise. But how did this cub from that illegal operation find its way specifically to her remote station? Was it truly just a desperate animal, or was there something far more sinister at play? Just as the thought crystallized, her satellite phone blinked, then went dead. A complete communication blackout. The silence that followed was suffocating. Then a sudden jarring blare shattered the fragile calm. The automated perimeter sensor, usually silent, shrieked its warning. "Intruder alert. Eastern sector. Vehicle approaching rapidly." The blaring intruder alert snapped Alara into a terrifying reality. She rushed to the reinforced window, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Through the shimmering heat haze, A dark shape rapidly resolved into a rugged off-road truck. Its windows were tinted, opaque, and unyielding, and disturbingly, it bore no identifying logos or markings. It sped across the desert floor, kicking up a plume of red dust, hurtling straight for her station. Her blood ran cold. The truck wasn't slowing for the security checkpoint that marked the perimeter of her isolation. There had been no radio contact, no warning. This wasn't a friendly visit. It was an invasion. The chilling realization hit her. The communication blackout, followed immediately by this vehicle's aggressive approach, felt less like a coincidence and more like a calculated, deliberate act of suppression. They had cut her off. For a terrifying moment, raw panic threatened to overwhelm her. Her breath hitched, her muscles stiffened. But years of rigorous field training, of confronting dangerous wildlife and unpredictable environments kicked in. Her mind, despite the fear, began to process, to plan. She moved with a sudden, urgent purpose, grabbing her essential go bag, water bottles, emergency rations, her comprehensive medical kit, her camera, and the research notebook containing Nandi's number, and, crucially, the photos of the cub's tattoo. Evidence. The cub, previously lethargic and feverish, suddenly tensed on the examination table. Its tiny head lifted, ears swiveling toward the sound of the approaching vehicle. A soft, primal growl, more vibration than sound, rumbled in its throat, directed at the unseen threat. It knew. The animal instinct, honed by millennia of survival, sensed the danger. "Looks like we're leaving," Ilara murmured, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. There was no other option. She gently but swiftly wrapped the cub in a fresh blanket, its small body still unnervingly hot, and carefully placed it into her field pack. She left the top flap open, ensuring it had air, the risk of its presence secondary to the certainty of its demise if left behind. She slipped out through the rear maintenance entrance, a low, unassuming door designed for utility access. Descending into the sparse desert vegetation, she moved quickly, her eyes already fixed on a familiar landmark, a winding, dry riverbed that offered both concealment and a known escape route. Every rock, every gnarled bush became a piece of cover. Behind her, the screech of tires on gravel tore through the desert's quiet. The truck had slammed to a halt. Then, the dull thud of heavy doors slamming shut, followed by the muffled, aggressive shouts of men. Their voices, demanding and guttural, echoed across the dunes, carried by the rising heat of the day. They had found the station, and they would find the empty interior, and then they would come for her. Ilara pushed herself, moving with a speed and stealth born of desperation. The cub, nestled surprisingly quietly in her pack, seemed to understand the urgency. She moved like a phantom, her desert-worn boots finding purchase on the uneven ground, her shadow long and distorted in the growing light. The dry riverbed offered some immediate concealment, its deep, sandy banks providing temporary shelter from prying eyes. But the midday sun was climbing, a relentless, punishing orb, already beating down with an intensity that promised dehydration. She found a small overhang, a sliver of shade cast by a large rock formation, and ducked beneath it for temporary respite. The cub was worryingly lethargic now, its earlier surge of alertness gone. Its small body, even through the blanket, felt weaker, struggling against the combined assault of illness and the immense stress of their escape. Ilara offered it water from her emergency supply, and it weakly lapped at the offering, its tongue barely able to reach. Then, a distant mechanical hum broke the fragile silence. Not one engine, but multiple, the sound of vehicles spreading out, fanning across the desert. They weren't just checking the station. They were hunting. Ilara's breath hitched. The cub's tattoo, that small, clinical branding, suddenly felt like a mark etched onto her own skin. She was no longer just a scientist, an observer. She was personally embroiled in a dangerous, terrifying game, hunted not for something she had done, but for protecting a vulnerable creature, for bearing witness to a truth someone desperately wanted to keep hidden. The cub, nestled precariously in Ilara's lap beneath the dusty overhang, stirred. Its intelligent amber eyes, still shadowed with fever, fixed on her with an unnerving clarity. To her astonishment, it pushed itself up, struggling onto its three good paws. With a wobbly gait, It began limping deliberately towards the deeper, darker shadows at the back of their shallow shelter. "What are you doing?" Alara whispered, a mix of concern and bewilderment in her voice. The cub's movements were slow but imbued with an undeniable sense of purpose. Hesitant but compelled by the sheer strangeness of the situation, Alara followed. The cub disappeared into the gloom. She crouched, her body tensing, and squeezed into a narrow, almost invisible passage. Immediately the air cooled, a blessed relief from the scorching desert heat that had been pressing down on her. The passage was unmapped, unknown. "This isn't on any of my maps," Ilara breathed, a tremor in her voice as she switched on her headlamp. Its beam cut through the thick darkness, revealing a rough-hewn tunnel. Ahead, the cub waited, a tiny sentinel looking back at her as if urging her onward, moving with an uncanny sense of guidance. This was beyond normal animal instinct. The cub seemed to know where it was going, acting as a clear, deliberate guide. The passage abruptly opened into a breathtaking circular chamber, perhaps 15 meters across. A single ethereal shaft of sunlight pierced a high opening, illuminating the space with an almost sacred glow. Alara's headlamp beam swept across the walls, revealing hundreds of ancient rock paintings, human figures, galloping animals, abstract symbols, a prehistoric gallery previously undiscovered by modern eyes. "My God," Alara whispered in awe, her earlier fear momentarily eclipsed by the sheer wonder of the find. But the moment of wonder shattered as her headlamp beam swept into a corner and froze. On a low rock shelf, a collection of modern items lay starkly visible. Empty plastic water bottles, crumpled food wrappers, a standard first aid kit, and, most disturbingly, a small collapsible metal animal cage. "Someone's been using this place," Alora realized, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. The trash wasn't ancient. It was recent, weeks old at most, not years. This wasn't a historical relic. It was a contemporary hideout. Her eyes darted, picking out more details in the periphery. Faded shipping labels on robust plastic crates, partial addresses visible, leading straight to Abu Dhabi. Tucked behind a large boulder, partially concealed, was a small high-tech satellite communications device, similar to the one on her own defunct phone. The horrifying truth dawned on her with sickening clarity. This wasn't just a cave, an ancient sanctuary. It was a way station for wildlife traffickers, a temporary holding pen. The cub's bizarre, purposeful behavior now made a terrible, sickening sense. It hadn't just stumbled from the desert. It had escaped from here, from this very chamber, seeking the nearest human it had encountered, hoping for help, not for another cage. But how did it know the difference between humans? How did it know she would help and not simply recapture it for the traffickers? The question gnawed at her, a bitter seed of suspicion. A sudden, distant roar of engines grew louder, then abruptly cut off. It was followed by the faint echo of men's voices drifting from the riverbed entrance. Their pursuers were impossibly close. Alara extinguished her headlamp, plunging the chamber into semi-darkness, relying only on the faint shaft of sunlight. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drum against the silence. She was trapped, and her satellite phone, useless in the deep underground, offered no hope of outside help. They were here, and she was caught, a lone woman and a sick cub at the heart of a dark secret. If you thought things couldn't get any more intense, buckle up. We're about to dive deeper into a conspiracy that reaches far beyond a simple desert rescue. Make sure you hit that like button, share this video, and subscribe so you don't miss a single terrifying moment of what's to come. Trapped in the ancient chamber, the distant shouts of their pursuers drawing ever closer, Alara knew she had to make a desperate, dangerous gamble. The cub, still weak but watchful, lay beside her. Her eyes fell on its bandaged paw. It was a brutal choice, but the only one she had. With a heavy heart, she carefully removed the makeshift bandage, exposing the raw wound, and then, with a sharp intake of breath, gently pressed it. A sharp, pain-filled yowl ripped through the silence of the room, reverberating off the rock walls. It was a sound of pure agony, designed to carry. But instead of retreating, the cub looked up at her, its intelligent amber eyes seeming to understand. Then, to Alara's astonishment, it continued vocalizing, not out of pain, but with an eerie, sustained distress, like a perfectly orchestrated performance. The sounds created a flawless illusion, a lost, injured animal, alone and trapped somewhere in the cave. Alara's risky gambit hinged on the traffickers' greed, their desire to retrieve their valuable property unharmed. Within minutes, the guttural sounds of men's voices grew louder, echoing from the cave mouth. Two figures, silhouetted against the waning light, entered the chamber, speaking rapidly in Arabic. Alara, hidden behind a large rock, caught fragments, shipment schedule, replacement costs. They carried powerful flashlights, their beams cutting through the gloom, but no visible weapons. They were confident in their remote, hidden location, sure they merely had to reclaim an escaped animal. As they began their search, calling to the cub with false, cooing tones, Alara silently switched her satellite phone to camera mode. From her concealed position, her hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins, she captured clear, indisputable images of both men. She then switched to video, recording snippets of their hushed, anxious discussion about their trafficking operations. The cub's performance was flawless. It continued to vocalize a low, pitiful mewling, just enough to keep the men searching, to draw their attention away from Alara's hiding spot. It moved subtly through the shadows, always just out of reach, a ghost. But as the men edged closer to Alara's rock, the cub abruptly went silent. Then from the opposite side of the chamber, a fresh series of urgent cries began, a perfectly timed and sophisticated diversionary tactic. This is impossible, Alara thought, chills running down her spine, colder than the cave air. No wild animal, no matter how clever, should be capable of this level of deception and coordination. This wasn't just instinct, it was strategy. The horrifying realization hit her with the force of a physical blow, the tattoo, the uncanny intelligence, the deliberate actions, the escape itself. This cub wasn't merely captured from the wild. It was born in captivity, part of a sophisticated breeding program, habituated to humans, and cognitively advanced. Its escape wasn't accidental, it was planned, an act of defiance. The men's frustration mounted, their voices growing sharper. One of them pulled out a satellite phone, making a call. "They're bringing more people," he told his companion in accented English, his voice tight. "The boss wants the cub found before sunset. Too much invested." Alara knew her window was closing, rapidly shrinking with every passing second. She needed to act now. Seizing the opportunity created by the men's distraction, she moved with silent, cat-like precision towards the hidden satellite comms device she'd spotted earlier. The cub, abandoning its diversion, followed her, its limping steps almost soundless. With practiced efficiency, Alara powered on the device, its screen flickering to life. Her voice, a barely audible whisper against the encroaching danger, transmitted an emergency signal. "This is Dr. Alara Vance. Wildlife trafficking operation discovered at coordinates." She rattled them off. "At least 2 armed suspects. I have evidence. Send immediate assistance." The response wasn't from the expected conservation team. Instead, Dr. Nandi Kumalo's gruff voice filled her ear, clear and urgent. "Alara, this is Nandi. We've been tracking this cell since yesterday. Namibian anti-poaching unit en route, ETA 20 minutes. A wave of profound relief washed over Alara, but it was cut brutally short. One of the traffickers shouted, his voice laced with triumph and fury. "She's here! I see her!" They had spotted her. Relief, potent and intoxicating, flooded Alara for a fleeting second at Nandi's voice. But it was immediately replaced by an ice-cold dread. One of the traffickers had spotted her. "She's here! I see her!" he bellowed, his voice echoing menacingly. Alara didn't hesitate. She snatched up the cub, clutching it to her chest, and sprinted for the narrow passage they'd entered. Her boots pounded on the ancient stone, her breath rasping in her throat. She had to reach the outside, had to buy time for Nandi's team. As she burst from the cave into the harsh glare of the afternoon sun, a third trafficker, previously stationed outside, lunged. He was a burly man, his face grim with anger. His hand closed around her arm in a vice-like grip, twisting cruelly. The hidden satellite device, still clutched in her other hand, flew from her grasp, shattering on the unforgiving rocks. The cub tumbled from her arms, landing awkwardly on its already injured paw, letting out a pained yelp. The man pulled a glinting knife from his belt, its blade catching the sunlight, his intentions chillingly clear. Before he could strike, before Alara could even process the grim reality, a sound ripped through the very air. A roar, not a distant echo, but a guttural, bone-shaking force that vibrated through the riverbed, through Alara's bones. It was a sound of immense power, of primal fury. On the ridge above them, silhouetted against the blinding sun, stood a magnificent lioness. Her tawny coat, a masterpiece of natural camouflage, gleamed like molten gold. But it was her eyes, fierce and unyielding, that fixed on the scene below. Behind her, barely visible in the shimmering heat haze, was an entire pride, strategically positioned, a silent army of formidable predators. The trafficker froze, his knife still extended, his face draining of color. The lioness, without a sound, launched herself down the steep slope with terrifying speed. She didn't attack the man directly, not yet. Instead, with astonishing precision, she positioned her massive body squarely between Alara and the immediate threat, her stance protective, defiant. The cub, despite its injured paw, limped towards the majestic animal, letting out the same urgent contact call Alara had heard in her station window. The lioness responded with a deep, rumbling vocalization, a sound that resonated with unmistakable recognition and love. She's its mother, Alara realized, tears stinging her eyes, blurring her vision. She found us. The depth of the mother's tracking, the unprecedented gratitude for Alara's protection, the sheer impossibility of it all was awe-inspiring. Blinded by arrogance, or perhaps sheer terror-induced stupidity, the trafficker made a fatal mistake. He lunged with his knife, aiming for Alara, perhaps believing the lioness was merely a deterrent. The lioness's attack was swift, brutal, and decisive, a blur of power, teeth, and claws. The man barely had time to scream. The other two traffickers, drawn by the commotion, emerged from the cave, their eyes widening in horror as they saw their companion fall. But their shock was short-lived. They found themselves instantly surrounded by the organized, vigilant pride. The desert, silent witness to countless struggles, would reclaim them. Their fate was equally swift. When the Namibian anti-poaching unit finally arrived, their jeeps kicking up dust plumes, they found Alara, shaken but composed, calmly documenting the scene with the recovered satellite phone, taking pictures of the cave, the evidence, and the grim aftermath. The lioness, now calm, gently nudged her cub, then with careful precision, picked it up in her mouth and carried it back to the waiting pride, disappearing into the vastness of the desert, a silent promise kept. The traffickers' bodies lying broken beneath the harsh sun were a stark, brutal testament to their crimes. The ensuing investigation, fueled by Alara's evidence, revealed the full scope of the horrifying operation. The cave was not just a holding pen for lions, but a sophisticated hub for trafficking leopards, cheetahs, and even rare desert elephants. The tattoos, Nandi confirmed, were for buyers seeking specific, traceable lineages, a grotesque form of branded ownership. DNA analysis irrevocably confirmed the cub and the lioness were indeed mother and child, separated weeks ago by the traffickers. Against all odds, the mother had tracked her offspring across vast distances, led by an instinct that defied scientific understanding, eventually to Alara, an unlikely human ally. The scientific implications were profound: advanced communication, spatial memory, and an apparent cooperation between a wild animal and a human rescuer, challenging fundamental assumptions about lion cognition. 6 months later, Alara stood at a sanctuary window, watching the cub, now healthier and stronger, playing boisterously with other rescued lions. The mother lioness, rehabilitated and thriving, watched from a distant enclosure, her golden eyes finding Alara's with uncanny precision. "Still watching out for me," Alara murmured. A deep, unbreakable connection forged between them. The lioness chuffed softly, the same sound Alara had first heard, a primal acknowledgement that a desperate mother had, against all reason, sent her child to the one human who might help. The Namibian desert had always been a world of stark beauty and unforgiving truths for Dr. Alara Vance, a landscape she studied with rigorous scientific detachment. but it was the appearance of a single, impossibly weak lion cub at her window that shattered her carefully constructed reality. What began as a desperate plea for survival unfolded into an unbelievable journey, pushing Alara beyond every scientific protocol, every boundary of her understanding. That emaciated cub, with his piercing amber eyes and the chilling 617 tattoo, wasn't just a victim. It was a key. It led Alara from her isolated station into a hidden cave, a nexus for a horrifying wildlife trafficking conspiracy. The cub's uncanny intelligence, its purposeful guidance, its sophisticated diversionary tactics, all defied conventional animal behavior, hinting at a truth far stranger and more profound than mere instinct. In the end, it was not just human courage, but a mother's fierce, tracking love and an unexpected alliance with the wild that brought justice. Alara's world, much like the desert itself, now held secrets deeper and more complex than she ever imagined, challenging the very definition of intelligence and connection.